You are on the next level. This is The Beautiful Truth, where the expression is still free.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
And you're very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth on breakfornews.com with Fintan Dunne reporting from an undisclosed location. Yes, folks, I'm hiding out from the coronavirus. For the purposes of the video, I've taken off my dark glasses, which of course will prevent you from being recognised by the virus, and I've removed my burqa. I'm not messing around with this handkerchief stuff. It's you want your full body burqa, and then the dark glasses for an added layer of protection as well. Of course, I have my little mini AK-47 also for shooting viruses with. You may laugh, but you catch a round from one of my AK-47 rounds, you're going to be wiped out if you're a virus. But if you think this is a bit over the top, if you think all of this is a bit over the top, well, maybe you're right. And maybe I actually agree with you. It's incredible hysteria, and it's coming from a bunch of people that you normally wouldn't trust an inch. It's coming from big government, it's coming from big media, and it's coming from big pharma. I can't think of three groups who have less credibility than those three, or three groups who are driven by power, mendacity, and money. So let's get into it. Let's look at what your actual real risk is from this virus. And I'm going to show you some information. You see, nobody dies of the virus. Not one person has ever, will ever die of the Covid-19 coronavirus. What people die of is pneumonia. That's what they die of. Pneumonia, fluid on the lungs, just like when you get a stuffy nose and you can't breathe through your nose. Similarly, when you get an infection of the lungs, it can turn into pneumonia, and other things can cause pneumonia as well. So that's what people are dying of. They're not dying from the virus, they're dying from consequences, pneumonia. So let's take a look at your actual pneumonia risk, because that's what we're really talking about here, aren't we? I'll bring up some images from the American Thoracic Society, and here's a graph that shows you the annual number of deaths. Now, this is in 2017. I'm going to roll this graph back quickly now to 1990 so you can see what things looked like back then, and it'll give you a better understanding of what all this is about. So here's under 5 mortality per 100,000 people in an age group from pneumonia. So under 5s are the most at risk, as you can see from the graph there, to die of pneumonia as a group by age. Under 5s, and they mostly die because of malnutrition, and they get the pneumonia virus is actually a pneumonia virus. Like there's many viruses competing. We'll get into that, and that's what you see the result. The next at risk group is the over 70s, and they die. Actually, the pneumonias that they have are driven by pollution, particulate matter, and following on from that, you can see the diminishing and far decreased risk for 50 to 70-year-olds in green, followed by, in blue, the 5 to 14-year-olds, and last of all, the cohort which represents the vast bulk of the population, which is at risk at the moment. That's the 15 to 49-year-olds. They're the ones the government is scaring the shit out of. And for no reason, because look at it. It is the lowest risk of all groups. Now, I can understand if the government had said, hey, over 70s should take care, but no, they didn't. The hysteria is widespread. But let's take a look a little bit more at this now. So that was 1990. I'm going to roll the graph forward now, and you'll see as we move forward, watch those under 5 deaths decreasing as medicines improve and nutrition improves, particularly in Africa and Asia, where those deaths are occurring, until as we came towards the end of the last century and came into the new one, the 70-year-old deaths from pneumonia eclipsed the 5-year-old deaths and came in as number 1. Moving it on, you can see that pollution as a cause of pneumonia and as a cause of death has just increased and increased and increased, even as infant mortalities have fallen. And there you see the situation now today, where pollution, particulate matter is the major driving cause of over 70s pneumonia, not viruses. And under 5s have improved considerably. But still, look at that risk for 15 to 50-year-old individuals. It's lower still. That's the real risk that we're talking about here, folks. And that's what they're not telling you. So your absolute risk from pneumonia is considerably low if you are in that age range. And even among the over 70s who contract pneumonia in Western hospitals from flu, which is a typical cause of pneumonia in the West, flu or other viruses, that pneumonia is treatable, and we do very well at treating it in the vast majority of people. But if you're over 70 and you've also got an existing medical condition and you're compromised in health already, well then obviously you are susceptible. But hey, so there's a lot of viruses queuing up to take a piece of the action out of you if you're that age. So no, that's not a big deal. So the actual mortality that we're talking about here for individuals in the 15 to 50 or even 15 to 70 is quite handleable and shouldn't be a cause of concern for the vast majority of people. So why all the hysteria? Good question. Now, when you look at the absolute risk of pneumonia and then take that into account, taking all of that into account, let's pose the $64,000 question. How much will global pneumonia deaths rise as a result of this new virus? By how much? By what percentage? Will they be 20% higher this year? Will they be 10? What about next year? Or what about even in the long term? How much will these pneumonia deaths that you're looking at there on that graph, how much will they increase by as a result of the Covid-19? And the answer is negligibly. Negligibly. Global pneumonia deaths you're looking at there are driven in the main by malnutrition and in older people by particulates, by pollution. And the actual threat to you from the viral sources of pneumonia is insignificant. And even, in fact, if you're 15 to 50, you needn't watch the rest of this video. Off you go. Have a nice life. Enjoy yourself. Have fun. Because this just simply isn't an issue for you. And as I say, I'd love somebody to come up with a compelling reason why this coronavirus is going to do well in the competitive marketplace of viruses. You know, there's a lot of older people around who would be at risk, and they are if they have existing medical conditions. But hey, there's a whole bunch of viruses lined up to try and take those old people out. And the coronavirus would want to be pretty good in order to do anything about that. And it's not. It's not. The truth is that outside of China, and we really don't know what went on in China. We can't trust anything about what we hear coming out of China. We don't know how they may have messed up over there, or what they've done, or what vaccination programs they may have rolled out in the area. But I can bet you one thing, you'll never hear about it if this was a screw up by pharma and their vaccine research groups and something that got loose. So in any event, the Chinese figures, we can't use them. But outside of China, what we do know, and we have pretty much good evidence to back this up, is that in huge numbers of people, this is entirely asymptomatic. I'd say for around about half of the people who would be, in inverted commas, infected with this virus, you're talking about minuscule effects. You might feel down, might feel low energy, off colour, but other than that, nothing major. And so it's very hard to equate that with the supposed virulence of this. But so that's about half the people. And maybe another third would experience, symptoms enough to put them, quite off colour for a few days, but not the end of the earth. And only a small fraction of individuals will experience severe effects from this virus. If you're unlucky enough to be in a subgroup which has a particular genetic susceptibility to this kind of lung infection, then you certainly may have a risk. And do young people die from this virus? Yes, they do. Young people die from this virus, but they are the exception, not the rule. They die because they have a particular genetic susceptibility. And the graph I showed you before for global pneumonia deaths pretty much mirrors the clinical practice in Western, clinical observations in Western medicine, that those who are affected most are older. So here you have something which has a disproportionate effect on a small number of genetically susceptible individuals. And that number is very, very low. So this virus's ability to cause deaths in a population of elderly people aboard a cruise liner is no indication of its ability to cause similar problems in the broader community. Truth is that every year a new influenza variation comes out, usually in Asia, and circulates around the world, just like with this coronavirus, doesn't it? Yeah. Now, of course, there's many people who wouldn't have any immunity to that new variation, or only perhaps a partial immunity to it. But do we shut down the airports and close all the factories? And do we shut down business from November to February? Well, by the current rules for coronavirus, we should. After all, influenza is a killer. Influenza kills people, lots of them, worldwide, every year. But it's a risk that we sort of put up with. So why are we making an exception for this virus, which, in terms of its general effect on the general population, is far weaker than influenza? Well, because of hysteria. Now, a lot of that hysteria has been driven by bad data, bad science, and bad media. Because a lot of assumptions are getting made about the mortality rate, as if that matters a damn. It doesn't, because it's a guesswork, is what they're using there. How do you know what the mortality rate is of a virus where most of the people who contract it are asymptomatic? Because you've no idea how many people have it, short of isolating a city and testing everybody in it just for academic purposes to figure out how many people actually had it versus how many people are in your hospitals with symptoms. See? So in the absence of doing that, nobody has tested en masse to determine the infectivity versus mortality rate. So it's pure guesswork. The only reliable data that you can work off for this is what happens in ICU. What kind of admissions do you have to ICU? And what we've seen in the West is our admissions to ICU. In one, say, Lancet study, for example, the admissions to ICU are 75% of them were for people over 70. By all means, look after your elders. By all means, take care, and we should, in terms of exposing people who are over 70 and already have medical conditions to this virus. They should be quite careful, as they should be with any virus, as they should be to make sure they don't contract anything, which will cause difficulty for them, considering their already weakened medical condition and their age. So those are legitimate concerns, but they're legitimate concerns for anything. They're legitimate concerns we've always had in relation to those individuals. There you go. That's the summary of the hype that you've been exposed to and some of the issues which debunk it. And my prediction, again, repeat, there will be no significant global increase in pneumonia deaths as a result of this virus. That's the bottom line. That's what they don't want to talk about. All right. I will be back with more soon, if the coronavirus doesn't get me. And I do hope that you can join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.